I've entitled this time of launch of Delusions, Half-Truths, and High Expectations of God. As you know, we're living in an increasingly complex world. A word that's thrown around so much these days is complexity. Change happens at rates we can barely imagine, and it will only continue to get more complex. Our ways of operating, our ways of thinking about the problems that we face won't be able to be used in quite the same way. We won't be able to put together the same skills and gifts that we did and we packaged in the past to deal with the complexities of today in the same way that we have been known to do. I use this slide in almost every presentation that I do. And that's a quote by Peter Senge, who said that nothing is more limiting to a group than the inability to talk about the truth. And see, that's what we're facing in the church, is an inability to talk about the truth. Now, I don't mean for us to come forward and say, well, the church is in decline. If you don't know that, you're in a different category entirely. I'm talking about the truth, about what that means and what it is that we need to do about it. Remembering, and I'll start in this place, remembering that we are children of God. We're not people just aimlessly wandering. While we might be in the wilderness, we serve a God who's going to lead us to a different place. So I'm calling us to deal with the truth, but underlying the truth that we have to face is God, who is there with God's grace and mercy, and who continues to work miracles in our midst. I want to talk about delusion just for a minute. An idiosyncratic belief or impression that is firmly maintained despite being contradicted by what is generally accepted as reality or rational argument, typically a symptom of mental disorder. Much of what we're dealing with in the church, in the way that we're looking at the facts before us, in the way that we're dealing with our reality, is delusion. We've taught ourselves ways of dealing with this big picture that's in front of us by telling ourselves particular narratives, and particularly, I think, what are some kinds of half-truths. Now, for the Episcopalians in the room, watch it be someone who isn't an Episcopalian. Does anybody know who this is? This picture didn't crop in properly, but this person would be in a collar. Anybody have any idea who this is? There's got to be one Episcopal Church nerd in here. It's Henry Knox Sherrill, former presiding bishop of the church. This is on the cover of Time magazine around 1950. Now imagine this picture. This is Henry Knox Sherrill. You can see the cross in the background, and you see the throngs of thousands of people. If you get a chance to look at this image, you can Google image this thing and see it. This idea that here is the great leader of what we might call mainline Protestantism. At that time, the Episcopal Church was positioning itself to be the national church. Just, you know, how we got the National Cathedral and more presidents as Episcopalians and Supreme Court justices and all of these sorts of things, but we were going to sort of be the face of the mainline Protestant with all of these throngs of people with the cross in the background. There is some sense that this past is only this far behind us when really it's entirely gone. And someone said from the audience, and a delusion to begin with. Possibly. But in many ways, that was our ideal. And I hate to look at the past and say it was all wrong. I mean, our organizational structure and the way we think is profoundly incarnational. That organizations were creating corporate bureaucracies at that time. That was an identity. It was something we really believed we could lead the country in this way. But now we've got a situation that is entirely different, don't we? More than entirely different, but we have these half-truths. And half-truths, I think, are worse than lies. We can typically pick up on a lie, but a half-truth has some sense to it. It is partially true, but it can be a way to delude ourselves, really. The first half-truth we tell ourselves, and there are people making money traveling around the church saying, it's not our fault. This is partially true. What are the arguments? Well, the culture has shifted, people don't go to church, etc., etc. Does anyone really think that the predicament that we're in is really not our fault? The fact that we have the only product that works 100% of the time, that changes and transforms lives, but we can't sell it to a consumer culture? Does anyone think it's not our fault? Now the reason that speakers are saying it's not our fault is that we don't want to go around beating people over the head and saying, you're the reason, you're a failure, this is why. But in some ways, we have not kept up. We have not relied on God to do a new thing. We have not looked for the new ways, and so partially it is our fault. The second one I hear all the time is, we're in steep decline, but we're growing spiritually. We may not have the numbers we had, but we have a small committed group. This is, could be true. I don't know. People say this is one of the great untested assumptions. No one's actually measuring whether we're growing spiritually. Everybody's just decided that we must be because we're a small committed group. But I would argue that even if that's partially true, doesn't growing spiritually mean we're growing deeper in discipleship in Jesus Christ? And don't disciples make new disciples? So if we're growing spiritually, should we also not, in the places where it's possible, be growing numerically? It's a half-truth that we're telling ourselves as a way of healing the wound of this decline, but it's holding us back. The other half-truth, or some such thing, is we touch more people now than ever. I don't know if that's true or not, but let's just say it is. Let's just say we can make that claim, that now more than ever we touch more people. I come back with the so what? So what? We touch more people now than ever. Are we changing lives? Are we making disciples? Are we bringing people to relationship with God? Isn't our mandate to take the gospel and to bring it to the world? If we touch more people now than ever, fine. What are the implications of doing that? This is a good thing. If in fact we're touching more people now than we ever have, that's great, but what are we doing with it? It's not enough, which is why if it's true, it's only half true. And the institution is in the way. I don't argue with that on the face. I'm on a part of a group that's helping to restructure the church, there's no doubt. But there is basically nothing that we want to do with God that the institution is keeping us from doing. Or if it is, that we can't change. We just haven't been willing to do it. See, the institution of the church is important, but it's not broken. The General Convention of the Episcopal Church is the favorite target of the day. It's not broken. It just serves a particular need and desire and want. It serves a particular group. In many ways, it's highly functional for what it does. There's nothing that can't be changed. The institution isn't in the way. We're unwilling to make the fundamental changes that we have to make in this church. It's not about the institution. I want to talk to you because it's easier sometimes to look outside and look elsewhere as we consider these issues, I want to talk to you about a trip to the South Pole. Jim Collins, the social science researcher and business author of Good to Great, has also written a book called Great by Choice and used his typical comparative case study methodology to illustrate the points of complexity and how organizations and leaders tend to deal with them. He talked about what he called 10X leaders and their comparison. 10X leaders were the ones who were able to navigate the complexity of the world in which we live and do it successfully, and the comparisons were the groups and the people who were not able to do that. And he describes it using a comparative case study of a trip to the South Pole by two separate groups, two separate expeditions to the South Pole, and I want to talk about that in relate it to our own context. In 1911, two teams prepared to reach the South Pole. One led by Roald Amundsen, a Norwegian, the other led by Robert Falcon Scott, a good Brit. Both highly educated and well-trained explorers, educated in the art of exploration. They were of similar ages, comparable experiences. One of them was able to lead their group successfully to the South Pole, Roald Amundsen. The other, in complete defeat and death, Robert Scott. They both faced round trips of 1,400 miles into uncertain and unforgiving environments where temperatures reach -20 on a good day in the summer, which is compounded by gale force winds. Keep in mind, this is 1911. There are no cell phones, no satellite links, no GPS, no modern communication. What was the difference between these two men of comparable experience? Why did one achieve success and the other defeat? Let's take a look briefly. Amundsen spent years building the capacity for this adventure. He bicycled nearly 2,000 miles from his home in Norway to Spain. He experimented with eating raw dolphin meat to determine its usefulness for energy in such an environment. He figured that he might be shipwrecked and surrounded by dolphins, so he should figure out if he could eat one. He even made a pilgrimage to study with the Eskimos so that he could learn what it was like to live in polar conditions with people who had lived in that environment. He learned how to pull dog sleds, how to ski, how to do this kind of work in that environment without sweating, which is a problem, which turns to ice, how to wear loose-fitting clothing. He learned Eskimo methods for nearly every situation he could imagine facing. His philosophy was this: you don't wait till you're shipwrecked to see if you can eat dolphin meat and if it will work. You don't wait till you're on an Antarctic journey to learn how to be a superb skier and understand the conditions. You prepare with intensity all the time so that when conditions turn against you, you can draw on a reservoir of strength and reserve. And when conditions are in your favor, you can strike while there is opportunity to do so. Robert Scott represents quite a contrast to Amundsen. In the years leading up to this adventure, he could have trained like a maniac, learned to live in the Arctic, take a couple 1,000-mile bike ride. He did not. He could have gone to live with the Eskimos. He did not. He could have practiced with more dogs, making himself comfortable with dogs. Instead, he was committed to ponies. Now, when I talk about him and his failure, it's not to put him down. He was a brilliant explorer, but he was stuck in a particular model. He really thought that the answer was to take ponies. But unlike dogs, which he didn't really understand, ponies sweat on their hides. And when they sweat, they get encased in sheets of ice. They post hole in the snow, and they generally don't eat meat. Scott chose ponies to take to the South Pole. He also bet on what in those days were called motor sledges. This would be the forerunner to the snowmobile that had not been tested in those conditions. As it turned out, the engines cracked within a few days. The ponies were dead early on, and the team slogged a 1,400-mile journey, hauling the equipment on their backs. Unlike Scott, Amundsen had systematically built in buffers to unforeseen events. Amundsen had set up different way stations along the way, multiple supply depots in case he missed one. Scott did not do this. Scott put one flag at each depot. If he got off track, it would have brought disaster. Probably one key element describes it best. They had to take a particular altitude measurement. Scott brought one thermometer, and it broke. Amundsen brought 4. Amundsen's team traveled the same distance every day. Didn't matter whether it was super cold, what the weather conditions were, same distance every day, day in and day out. Scott's team traveled as far as they could to the point of exhaustion some days, and when the weather was bad, stayed. So it was an uneven journey. On December 15th, 1911, Amundsen reached the South Pole, raised a Norwegian flag, and addressed an envelope to Scott, assuming he would be the next person there, but not as a, I got here first, but as an insurance policy in case his team didn't make it back. He could not have known that Scott and his team were 360 miles behind him. More than a month later, Scott found himself staring at Amundsen's flag. On that day, Amundsen was 500 miles north with only 8 easy days left in the journey. Amundsen left and made it home. Scott left that place, stalled in mid-March, which is the really as winter begins to come on. Exhausted and depressed, and 8 months later, a recon team found a Scott's team dead in the snow. Each of these men and their teams faced dramatically different outcomes, not because of different circumstances. They faced the same environment, with the same year, with the same weather, with the same level of experience, and the same goal. The difference was the behaviors. They are these 10Xers, these groups that are able to navigate this kind of complexity, exhibit not more creativity, more vision, more charisma, more ambition. They are not more blessed by luck. They are not more risk-seeking. They are not able to make bigger bets. They do not lack creativity or ambition or the courage to bet big. They all do these things. The ones that succeed and the ones not. What is the difference? The difference is that those who succeed in navigating the kind of complexity that we are facing now embrace a paradox of control and non-control. That is this. They understand that they face continuous uncertainty that they cannot control and accurately predict. And on the other, reject the idea that forces outside their control will change or determine their results. They accept responsibility for their own fate. Brothers and sisters, it's time for us to take responsibility with God for the future that God prefers for us, to take responsibility for the future that God prefers for this church and all of the organizations we represent here today. Collins suggests these core behaviors. Fanatic discipline. Discipline is not being regimented. It's not the same as hierarchical obedience or adherence to bureaucratic rules. It's an inner discipline to do whatever it takes to create an outstanding result. Something which I think the church needs to very seriously consider. What will it take? What kind of discipline will it take for us to make the decisions we have to make for the sake of the future and the sake of the kingdom of God that we have heretofore been unwilling to make? What does that mean? What identity must we embrace, and what must we sacrifice for the sake of reaching people, for the sake of transforming the world around us? I want to see us take on the same mantle of discipline as our forebears. It's that important. It's that critical. It is a matter of life and death for the world in which we live. We must take responsibility for our future and not blame it on a shifting culture or a complex world. God is with us. Empirical creativity. By empirical, I mean direct observation. I mean practical experiments. Ways of experimenting with our life and our ministry. It calls for action that's grounded in some sense of analysis. Now, I don't mean let's get paralyzed by numbers. We're pretty good at that. I mean, we've got people putting up statistics all the time. We don't need to see any more numbers. And I'm a trained social scientist now, and I get all of that. I think it's very important. The empirical piece of this is important. Right? But we have to act. We can't continue to talk about it. And see, that's what we're doing. We continue to have the conversation. At some point, we have to actually do something, and we are in many places. But we need to do more. The discernment often can come after we act. We need to act. And having empirical data does tend to ground us. It keeps us from all of these untested assumptions that we have. Everybody with their brilliant ideas, but nothing really to back them up. But if we can act with a sense of creativity. Amundsen and Scott did this. They started their expeditions in different places. Scott began his journey in a place that everyone said it should start, and where traditionally expeditions had taken from. But Amundsen looked at it differently. He looked at the data and made different decisions, but he acted. Neither of them could know the outcome, but they were willing, both of them, to act. Finally, having a productive paranoia. This is a kind of hypervigilance that we have to our surroundings. And this is where I think the "it's not our fault" ties in. If we had a real productive paranoia about the situation that we were facing, when we saw this coming on in the 60s, we would have been acting and understanding that our environment had changed. But we weren't paying enough attention. We weren't quite productively paranoid. We were living off the generosity of the past. We couldn't really see a way. We weren't looking for it. Amundsen worked for years to prepare. He created a sense of self-awareness, of thinking about the journey. This productive paranoia, this hypervigilant self-awareness that is grounded in Christ will sharpen our skills and move us to the future to which God is calling us. Brothers and sisters, it's time to act. We are not simply people wandering aimlessly. I return to the beginning of this talk. We are children of God. We have been not only empowered by God, but we have been given God's own first gift of the Spirit to lead us and guide us into this world and in this place in which we find ourselves. It's time for us to raise our expectations of what God is doing in the world. We don't serve a God who sits by and watches this happen. We serve a God who is willing to, with us, co-create a future. We're called now in this time not to continue the conversations, but alongside the conversations to act, to do, to become what God is calling us to do. And it is more than this church, this mainline Protestantism, this religion that is in decline. It is more than that. God wants for us more than we could ask or imagine, and has gifted us to do it. We're having these conversations here, and it is for us now to go into the world and act. Act, act, act. Act. With God, all things are possible. And I'm encouraging you this day to raise your expectations of what God can do in your midst. I guarantee you, I think I read this somewhere, that God working through us can do infinitely more than we could ask or imagine. Glory to Him from generation to generation in the church and in Christ Jesus forever and ever. Amen.